Well, it's the postcard lottery no one wants to win, and today there are predictions 4 more Melbourne postcodes could join those enduring a second lockdown. But it might not end there.
We're all in this together.
We'll get through this together.
We'll get through this together, Australia.
That's a line we've heard over and over, but for the 300,000 Melburnians locked down again, there's no together about it.
I think the panic has set in more than it was before because we're isolated as a suburb.
By doing isolated areas isn't helping the situation at all.
Their lives are being sent back into lockdown while the rest of us are opening up, and that's a completely different psychological experience to the first lockdown. In hard times, shared suffering is everything because, as plenty of psychological research affirms, humans are wired to be comparative beings. How well off we think we are depends on how well off we think everyone else around us is.
So it doesn't really matter how wealthy or free we are. What actually matters is how wealthy or free we are in comparison to others. So we might be a millionaire, but if we live in a land of billionaires, then we actually feel quite deprived.
Basically, it's not deprivation that gets to us so much as relative deprivation. And the problem with that is it creates a sense of injustice.
I feel it's not fair.
Oh, it is a bit unfair.
Sort of like locked down by postcode and we're all being punished for it.
The frustration is that it's not consistent. It's different everywhere you look. You know, the rules are different for different people. I'm going to follow the rules. And yet the threat is what I get. I just don't understand that.
Now, these aren't arbitrary decisions. The government's following the best advice it can get from the best experts it has. The point here is that these people are feeling singled out, under threat, stigmatised. And you can understand why, with so many eager to find someone to blame.
At least one of the new virus hotspots was triggered by an end of Ramadan feast in Coburg for South Sudanese migrants.
There's no excuse for that. They put their religion ahead of the law of the land.
But when are we going to wake up to the fact that encouraging people to live here as South Sudanese speaking Dinka rather than as Australians speaking English is not good for us, it's not good for cohesion, and it's certainly not good for recently arrived migrants.
You know what else is not good? Getting facts like that wrong.
It was an error, where I wrongly linked a specific COVID cluster in Melbourne's suburbs with the South Sudanese community. It wasn't accurate, it was incorrect.
Spectacularly so, because something like 90% of Victoria's South Sudanese community are actually Christians, so the chances of them celebrating the end of Ramadan seem, shall we say, slim. To be clear, there's no evidence linking the South Sudanese community to Melbourne's outbreak. In fact, as of right now, aside from some dodgy hotel quarantine, nobody knows exactly what the source of this outbreak is.
We don't have definitive evidence. We don't have the full picture yet.
So maybe we should stop pretending to know things we don't, because as it is, we're creating an impression there's something negatively special about the people in lockdown, like they're being punished for being careless, as though we're not. As though there aren't people hugging and shaking hands all over the country, neglecting social distancing practices they previously upheld. As though countless people outside these suburbs, or even Victoria, aren't guilty of precisely the same things that probably led to clusters in Melbourne's north and west.
What we tend to do is that we tend to see our in-group as more favourable. We tend to see the nuance and the diversity within our group, but when we look at the groups that aren't like us, the out-group, we're more likely to say, well, it's their bad behaviour that led to this particular outcome.
Stigmatising these people, blaming them, is dangerous for 2 reasons. First, we all need these people's sacrifice right now.
We've done this because we have to, not to punish people in those postcodes, but to protect them and to protect all Victorian families.
These people are doing us all a service. This is civic sacrifice. And the best response to that isn't disdain or judgment, but gratitude and empathy. And if they feel punished and suspected and derided, my guess is that that makes rebellion and non-compliance far more likely.
When people are stigmatised, particularly groups are separated and told that they're behaving badly, they tend to withdraw into their own groups. They tend to look for defences.
But the second and possibly greater danger is that our real motivations for assigning blame to these people is to preserve a certain mythology that somehow this pandemic is within our control, that it strikes the blameworthy, that if we just do the right things, then we'll enjoy a steady, mostly uninterrupted pathway out of this pandemic. That's a more comfortable thought than what's probably the truth. that these things will happen, that this is far from over, that we're playing a game of postcode lottery and that any of us might be next.